Ken Owen, Bill Spicer. Thank you.
All right. Are there any changes to the agenda?
Mr. Chair, there are no changes this evening.
All right. At this time, we would take comment from the public on anything that is not on our agenda. And we will then move to the approval of the July 16th minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
All right. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Passed unanimously. Yeah, wasn't here. Okay, so that moves us up to, whoops, I've turned the pages. Where are we now? That puts us up to the departmental updates.
Mr. Chair, members of the Harbor Commission, my director's report this month will just be brief regarding some of the council items that have gone over the last month or two since our last meeting. The council did approve our annual consultant lobbyist contract with a firm called Carpy & Clay. It includes Del Smith. He's kind of phasing out, and so he has some new partners, so the name of the firm has changed to Carpy & Clay. But this is our lobbyist contract involving our annual dredge contract with the Corps of Engineers. The other council items that have proceeded forward were is the commercial fisherman lease for berthing on Cabrillo Landing, our license agreement with the web service company for the laundromat in the harbor, our annual contract with Work Incorporated, which provides janitorial services for the waterfront department. And then, as you all know, we were successful in getting good bids, and we have authorized and council has approved the construction contract for Marina One, beginning our phased replacement of the entire Marina One docking system. So those have all been approved by council and are proceeding forward. The other item that I was going to report to you on is our continuing effort to do some master planning or mini master planning of the area called West Beach. This is just the beach area. It is not the Cabrillo Boulevard pedestrian improvement project, but a separate look at what type of changes, if any, that we might be able to make on West Beach for the stakeholders, and mostly ocean-dependent or ocean-related uses that take place there on an ongoing basis. Pat Saley, a consultant who's done a lot of work for our department, has been spearheading this effort, working with the Park and Recreation Department, the Redevelopment Agency staff, and the waterfront staff. But most importantly, we've been trying to get input from those stakeholders and interested groups that see West Beach, have an interest in what goes on at West Beach and what they might see as improvements for the area. So I believe it was back in August, we had our last, or probably our last stakeholder group meeting. About 20-25 people attended that. It was a good attendance, and Pat went over basically the results of all of the interviews that she's conducted with individual groups or individuals that have expressed an interest in different type of use or improvements on West Beach. And what she has done and was included in your packet was actually there were 3 alternatives that were looked at the stakeholder meeting. After the input and comments from the stakeholders at that meeting, there are now 2 alternative or options for changes or some infrastructure improvements on West Beach that are still of interest or would accommodate some of the ocean-related groups and their activities. So I've attached those to the packet, and I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have. But more importantly, I'd like to tell you kind of where we're going or where what the next steps are. ultimately, Pat will come to the Harbor Commission and make a presentation. She'll go through some of what I've been providing as progress information to you, and what the concepts and plans that are currently being discussed or identified look like, and she'll make that presentation. It's possible that could take place at our October meeting. But she will also go to the Park and Recreation Commission because, as you know, they have recreational uses on West Beach. And if you've driven by West Beach in the last week, you can see there's a major activity going on called the West Beach Music Festival. So much of what we do in this planning effort has to take those type of activities into consideration. And then ultimately, after going to Park and Rec and Harbor Commission, we'll probably go to the Planning Commission and ultimately on to City Council for their consideration. And the final decision would be as whether or not there's anything as part of these plans that should be pursued further, meaning that there would be some permitting, exploration, or approval process, or funding, which would be necessary to make some of the physical improvements in that area. And it's been made fairly clear at all of the stakeholder meetings that there really is no currently identified funds or sources of funds for any of that without council identifying it, because it's not something that our department feels that we should be funding or pursuing as part of the planning effort. So with that, I would answer any questions you might have, and then just tentative agenda items for October. We'll hopefully have the lease with the boat launch mini mart, and I think Scott had a couple other ones.
And we're also working on the Harbor Mail Center with Jacques Bertrand.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bridley. Are there any questions for Mr. Bridley? All right, very good.
Yeah, I do
Kramer.
have a question. Is there any thought as to how much this might cost? I realize that there isn't any money for it at the moment, but how real is the possibility that it will happen? And
No estimates have been identified as part of that, because partly we don't really know what components might be included. I think if you look at the two alternatives, Alternative A is a fairly low-cost option or approach because it does not include any physical structures that would be built. Option B includes the possibility of structures that could be built to house the Chumash two-mall canoe area, storage and educational component, and then also in B would be some type of large, I'll call it pavilion for simplicity's sake, that would be used to cover the outrigger groups and their outrigger canoes and storage for their equipment. I'm sure that one would be much more expensive, but to a degree it also may be problematic in terms of obtaining approvals from the Coastal Commission, because any structures on beaches are are very hard and difficult to obtain.
And I had hoped to get to the August 19 meeting, but I couldn't. What was the, if you could say, I mean, was there a preference between A and B of the 20 people, 20 stakeholders who were there?
Well, I would say that the two groups, obviously the Chumash folks that were there, along with the outrigger folks, would prefer the alternative that includes more of a physical structure for their use. There was a third alternative, as I mentioned, that was fairly unanimous. Most of the folks or stakeholders that were there thought it was too aggressive. It was not necessary to take it to that next step, and that included relocating the bike path and adding some additional turf grass, and I think realistically they thought that was not. So I would say they're comfortable with either option because either option certainly improves upon the current layout.
And this money would be from the redevelopment funds, or what would it be from?
That's the expectations that ultimately would come from the redevelopment agency.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, are there any further questions for Mr.
Yes,
Briley?
I have a question.
Commissioner Anakuchin.
Mr. Briley, could you give us a quick briefing on these two drawings of the alternatives? There's no real legend on here. Explain what they are supposed to be showing us. What are these dashed squarish objects on here? What do those represent? What do all the arrows represent? When it says native dune plantings and points off somewhere, what does that mean? Does that exist? Is that proposed? Give us a rundown, would you please?
Sure, I'll try to. Let's start with just kind of backwards. If you look on the right-hand side of the alternative A, and I think they're not dramatically different, that we can't just go through one of them. The large kind of rectangle where it says kayak rental and upgraded outdoor or outrigger storage, that's currently where there is a kayak rental and an outrigger group that has kayaks stored on the beach in that area. And the intent would be to leave them in that general location and possibly upgrade their facilities in terms of storage racks or some uniform standard for how the racks would be constructed so that they look the same both on the easterly edge of West Beach or closest to Stearns Wharf to that area by the Rock Groin. The native dune plantings and the arrows there depict putting the native dune plantings, if any, between the bikeway and the seawall, which is a small strip that runs really from Stearns Wharf over to the Rock Groin area. I'm going to say it's a 10 to 12 foot strip of sand currently, and that's where the native dune plantings would be concentrated.
That's proposed.
Correct.
And the kayak rental is not proposed. That exists.
It exists.
Okay, so I think you're going to have to go through every one of these because
I will.
the same symbols are meaning two different things.
Right. And I think I can safely say there's really very little that is new or proposed other than the native dune plantings. And I think we're kind of softening on whether or not that should be a recommendation. The volleyball court in the large center box is currently there. There are a number of courts that are located in that general vicinity, and the intent is to leave them there. They can easily be removed as they were for the West Beach Music Festival activities. Moving further to the left of the page, or more to the center of the area where it says open boat storage, and then the other arrows say dredge equipment yard, and the other arrow says small boat storage condo. Currently, all of those are in that general area now. We have the dredge equipment yard, which is fenced and in that location. There is open boat storage, not currently as it is proposed by the two arrows. It's more adjacent to the small boat storage condos, which are on the other side. The idea there is to ring the the dredge storage yard with boats and storage facilities to somewhat, I won't say hide it necessarily, but maybe make it look like it's one complex rather than separate facilities. So the idea there is to just utilize what currently exists in a better manner to make it look like a unified complex. And then the last large box where it says upgraded outdoor, or not outdoor, outrigger and two-mall storage is, again, a general concept, put some unified effort to align the outriggers and possibly two-malls along the Rock Groin area where they are now, but they are a bit haphazard, so there may be an effort to try and, again, bring some standard unified approach as to the type of racks or storage boxes that are used by the different outrigger groups. The other arrows, if you will, or hatched boxes are simply not part of this project. They're part of the existing pedestrian improvement project, which is currently under construction on West Beach today. Does that help?
Yes, that does. One last thing, the scale is not to scale. What does that mean? What is the scale here?
I'm not sure I can answer what
There's
this...
a photograph. What part of the photograph does this not to scale area represent?
I'm not sure I can answer the question. Maybe I can answer it differently. The intent of this drawing is to show conceptual ideas and thoughts. It's the boxes may be smaller, they may be larger, so they're not to scale from the standpoint this is exactly how big the volleyball court would be, or this is how big the open boat storage area would be. I don't know the scale of this map. It's probably been reduced, and it is not accurate from the standpoint of it's not a construction drawing.
I see. My concern was how close together are these things? Are these things 20 feet apart or 200 feet apart?
Well, it kind of depends upon which ones you want to ask about. I think if you asked about the dredge yard equipment and the boat storage area, I think I could say that the intent is to ring the dredge equipment yard with the boat storage at, say, 10 feet apart or something in that range. How far that is away from the volleyball court, I couldn't tell you, but it's way more than 20 feet. It's probably 200, something along those lines. But I wouldn't, I guess my thought is don't concern yourself too much about that at this point. It's a concept drawing. It's intended to show the different uses and where their general location would be. If there is consensus that this is where it should go, we will come back to you with more scaled drawings that will further depict how it would be constructed and exactly how it would be located.
I teach all my students no map is complete without a north arrow and a scale.
And again, it wasn't intended to be a map. I apologize for that. It was simply to kind of just depict general concepts.
All right. Commissioner Owen.
Mr. Bridley, one of the things about the West Beach pedestrian project that I liked, and I thought it was part of that, was the opportunity, well, what certainly is part of that is the opportunity for education. Interpretive signage about the Santa Barbara Channel, about the harbor, about the Channel Islands. And one of the things that really turned me on about it was an opportunity to talk a little bit about what native plant species would have normally been found in the area. So I thought that was part of the improvement plan, maybe not, but either way I support having that be a part of this project in this area. Certainly somewhere in the waterfront is important, but I think since we're doing, the city has got a commitment to education in this particular spot, that this is a good place for it.
I don't know all of the details of the West Beach pedestrian improvement plan as well as maybe I should to answer your question. There will be signage, there will be educational signage, there will be artistic interpretations of various different things, including I think some Chumash, which is very native to what took place at, what's the park? Drawing a blank. Ambassador Park, thank you. Right across the street. So I can't give you the details. If you'd like it, I can certainly find out those. But if we do native plantings of some type, then certainly that would be a component that could come as part of the West Beach project, not just the pedestrian one.
All right. Are there any further questions on this point? Thank you, Mr. Bridley. Very, very nicely done. Business Services Report.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Well, I'm happy to report that the Harbor Laundry Room is open for business as of August 21st, the new and improved Harbor Laundry Room. We had an open house sort of orientation on August 20th and 21st prior to the opening. Invited all the liveaboard folks and posted the marina gates that this would be taking place. And we had a pretty good turnout, between 30 and 40 people on those 2 evenings to get the orientation on the laundry room. There are some changes in the operation. One that's been particularly well received is that it is just for marina key card holders only and not the general public, just for authorized key card holders. So we've heard nothing but great reports about that policy change. The other big difference is that these machines are coinless. There's no cash machine in the operation. There are no coins. It's simply operated by a card reader type situation. So that's a change there too. And that's a outgrowth. Oh, looks like Mary's got one. Visual aid there. Mary brought one of the cards. So the laundry cards may be purchased at the laundry room itself with a debit or credit card. Additionally, we have about 75 of them left at the Waterfront Department office for free. So if any slip holders are watching tonight, they're welcome to come by and pick one up. We're trying to limit it one per slip so that we can distribute them as widely as possible. The cards cost $5 to get the card, and the ones that we're distributing have $3 worth of laundry cleaning value on them, so it's an $8 value. So you can just stop by the office and sign up for your first card. Again, they can also be purchased with a credit or debit card at the laundry room itself. The price is $1.75 per wash, which is competitive and equal to the last operator, and it's 75 cents for 45 minutes of drying time. And it is getting considerable use and positive feedback from the public at this time. Moving on to the leasing status, it's going to be a busy fiscal year for the property management department. We have a dozen leases coming due in fiscal year 2010, including one that will be for your consideration tonight. The program will be that our property management staff, including myself, will be producing draft leases in concert with the city attorney's office and then negotiating the various leases, some large, some small, including the boat launch mini mart, Harbor Mail Center, which we hope to bring both of those to you next month, the Santa Barbara Sailing Center, which expires at the end of December. That's Skip Abed's operation over by the launch ramp. The Brophy Brothers offices expire at the end of November. They have several offices in the Marine Center building. We'll be negotiating those probably in tandem with the Brophy Brothers restaurant, which will be one of our bigger negotiations this year, if not the biggest, and that comes up at the end of January. Also next year we have the Santa Barbara Chamber of Commerce Visitor Center. A lot of people don't realize that's a waterfront tenant over there in the Garden Street parking lot. It's not a revenue generator per se, but that is coming up due. And then we had a couple short-term leases, you'll recall, with Nick Ize doing business as Marina Network and Mike Pizell, the marine surveyor, coming due in February. NOAA's offices for the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary coming due at the end of March. There's some question as to whether they will release those offices. We may be getting some or all of those offices back if they move some or all of their offices to UCSB, as is the current plan. But the last I heard was that they would be retaining some and giving back some. So we may have a leasing opportunity there. Also, Coastal Winery out on Stearns Wharf, formerly known as Stearns Wharf Vintners, will be coming up. That was a short-term 2-year lease. That'll be coming up at the end of March. And finally, Santa Barbara Water Taxis coming up at the end of April. And that concludes my business services report for tonight. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Reedman. Any questions for Scott on this part of his report? I have one question, Scott. On the leases, and tell me if this is not the appropriate time to ask, of these 11 tenants, the ones that might possibly have a percentage rent would be like the Sailing Center, Brophy Brothers Restaurant, and the Coastal Winery?
Chairman Kelly, actually a couple more than that. The Boat Launch Mini Mart is a percentage rent lease. Sailing Center, of course. Brophy's, of course. Chamber of Commerce actually has a very small percentage rent clause in their lease. I think, I don't know, we get a whopping $10,000 or $15,000 a year out of the Chamber of Commerce. Nick Ize, Marina Network, we do get a small percentage, and he is in percentage rents from his Wi-Fi operation and his web design and so forth that he does there. Mike Pizell is also, although an office tenant, he is a percentage rent tenant. And the only other ones, Coastal Winery and Santa Barbara Water Taxi, are also percentage rent tenants.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have any other questions? All right, thank you very much. And that takes us to the Facilities Management Report.
Chairman Kelly and Commissioners, every year one or more of our 7 parking lots receives a coat of asphalt slurry seal. This year, Granite Construction Company did some work on the Garden Street lot to repair some root upheaval, and Valley Slurry Seal did applied a coat of asphalt slurry to the 2 90-minute lots adjacent to Harbor Way and also to the Garden Street lot itself. This project this year cost about $90,000 and was included in the fiscal year 2009 capital improvement program. This fiscal year, the Harbor Main lot, including the launch ramp, is scheduled to be maintained in the same manner for about $250,000. They'll go through the design work coming up in the not-too-distant future, and it'll probably be done about the same time. It's fiscal year 2010 dollars, and the actual work itself usually bleeds into the beginning of fiscal year 2011. This is obviously our largest parking lot and has the potential to be a bit disruptive, but we've worked well with Public Works in the past to minimize those disruptions and kind of carve the lot up into manageable sections so we can service the folks that want to park in the area while the work goes on. It's a good program, worked well, and then after that one's done, we'll start back up at Ledbetter and work our way through all of them once again. In June, AIS Construction Company submitted a low bid of $1,780,000 to construct the first phase of the Marina One replacement project. We had all the contract documents are done, and we had our first pre-construction meeting last week, and we talked a little bit about some of the preliminary planning that AIS is doing, including submittal drawings for the shoreside work and their subcontractor in the construction of the floats. Right now, the shoreside work, which is a lot of utility work in behind our building to bring a new electrical feed out to the marina, is tentatively scheduled for November. And Bellingham Marine is the subcontractor to construct the actual concrete floating docks. They're working on their submittal drawings, and they're tentatively scheduled to start casting floats in December, which should arrive in our harbor around January and February for installation. The hope is that the whole project will be completed probably sometime in March or April. This project has the potential to be rather disruptive to the harbor community, especially those folks in Marina One. In the past, we convened several meetings with the Harbor Committee, subcommittee on Marina One. We're well attended, and we were able to get quite a few folks in to inform them about the details of the project, and we'd like to do so again. I think in next month, we're going to find out more details about the schedule, and if the subcommittee is interested, we could convene a few more meetings, invite the public, and let them know just what's coming. It's going to be an important project. We're going to talk over things like displaced vessels and stuff like that. We have a meeting with Southern California Edison tomorrow, so we're doing as much pre-planning as we can to make sure that things go as smoothly as possible. You may have known, anybody who's been to the harbor lately has seen a beehive of activity in between the city pier and the travel lift pier. And one of our larger water distribution systems was mounted to the bulkhead between those two piers. It's very old, leaky, and required replacement. Flowers & Associates designed a new system to be mounted on the deck of the city pier, and Hanley Construction Company submitted a low bid of $78,000 to install this new system. The new system includes a new meter, backflow preventer, and a pressure regulator, and the system services both fish floats, north and south, the city pier, travel lift pier, Cabrillo Landing, and the 125 building. It's a significant upgrade, and it's been quite difficult to construct so far. It's required several design modifications, including replacing the main waterline feed through the bulkhead and under the sidewalk. But I think they've just about got it, and they should wrap things up in the next few days. Despite the complications, this system will eliminate chronic leaks and really facilitate servicing the system, and it should be much more reliable and serve some very valuable and important facilities in the harbor. And that concludes my presentation this evening. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Carl. Any questions for Carl on this report? Commissioner Spicer.
Just a quick question. On the slurry seal, when it's actually the launch ramp, how long is the launch ramp out of action?
Chairman Kelly, Commissioner Spicer, typically it's 24 hours. When things go well, they shut it down, they clean it up, put down the asphalt slurry, and stripe at night. So we'll try to keep it that short of a duration so that folks can come in. We may split it in half, so half of the ramp could be operable, and folks could launch boats and then do the other half. So they've been pretty good in the past about providing parking and access during these projects in the last few years, and that's what we'll work on.
Thank you.
All right, any further questions? I have only one. The bulkhead work and the replacement, do you have, Scott, Carl, an idea of how long the old system worked, and then what is the projected life of the new system that we're putting in to replace it?
Chairman Kelly, I believe the old system was put in the late 70s, so it lived about 30 years. The new system, assuming there's no problems with the city pier, should, I'd say, 30, 40, 50 years. It's much more serviceable where it's at now, so it'll be a lot easier to repair, all new modern products, so should be many, many decades.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any further questions? Then the Harbor Operations Report.
Good evening. Excuse me. Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Well, as we slip towards fall, it's nice to remember the high points of summer, and one of them, of course, is always the King Harbor Race, which took place, left Santa Barbara on July 31st and arrived in King Harbor in Redondo on the 1st of August. This year we had 81 local boats participate. There were 120 boats overall, which actually pleased the race organizers. They were only down 5 boats from last year, and considering the economy and considering what they saw in April at the Newport to Ensenada race, where they lost over 50% of the entrants compared to 2008, they were pleasantly surprised. In addition, the race was blessed with modest winds as opposed to the year before. I don't know if you remember, but it was pretty windy between Point Doom and Malibu, and we had 2 people went overboard. But this year there were no accidents. More people finished because of the modest winds, and it was a terrific success. On the local front, the local entry Bandit, who ironically was the last boat to enter the regatta, ended up with a top 3 overall finish, so kudos to them and to skipper Ted White. And 3 other Santa Barbara boats won their classes, the Captain Sluggo, that's Mike Burke, and Rush Street and Escapade all won their classes, and of course several other local boats turned in excellent times. So once again, it was overall a great year for Santa Barbara sailors in the King Harbor race. And on September 18th, which is tomorrow, we will have our reverse 911 test, courtesy of the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Department. As you recall, we've been working with the sheriffs for about a year now, working up to this test. The reverse 911 would be utilized in the case of a true emergency at the waterfront, where most likely evacuation would be needed. This could be violent coastal storms, tsunami, marina fire, and what have you. And this will be followed, of course, as I mentioned to you before, by research on our department's behalf into more dedicated information distribution systems for localized events, relocation of boats, electricity down in Marina 1, and what have you. It's important to remember there are 2 different projects. Tomorrow's the first step, and that's the reverse 911. So between 10 a.m. and tomorrow at noon, about 1,500 phones will ring, in theory anyway. This is all our slip permittees, with there are several numbers sometimes on the various slips. All our 60-plus tenants in the waterfront. And I'm going to read, if you'll allow me, Mr. Chair, the message, so anybody watching tonight will be reassured that this is a test and will know what to expect when the phone rings tomorrow. And it will say, this is the Santa Barbara County Reverse 911 system with a test for the Santa Barbara waterfront area. This is only a test, and you do not need to take any action at this time. In the event of a community emergency involving the Santa Barbara waterfront, Reverse 911 will be one of the methods we will use to contact you. You will be contacted again by the waterfront office for a survey collecting the results of this test, and will ask for your comments and suggestions. So in the October slip building, we will be sending out that survey for folks to fill out, to let us know, A, if they noticed any glitches in the delivery of the message, or if they have any suggestions. And also it will provide them an opportunity to update their phone numbers if a phone didn't ring and we don't have it in our database, so it'll serve a dual purpose in that regard. And then we will certainly report back to you the results of the survey and what happened there, and we will report to you the ongoing efforts to research and implement a dedicated information distribution system. Your monthly Marine Life Protection Act update, it's actually bi-monthly, I guess, this time. As you recall, this was a law that was passed in 1998 that required the state to implement a network of marine protected areas up and down the California coast. They're working on Southern California now. We've been working on that for about a year. I say we because, as you remember, I'm part of a 64-member stakeholder group that's involved in providing input and recommending maps and arrays of marine protected areas throughout the South Coast. There are 3 such working groups. They met for a 2-day period in August and then another 2-day period in September. And recently in September, we concluded the regional stakeholder group part of the process. We finalized the maps. We finalized what we call the rationales for each of the geographies and shapes in those maps, which describe the reasoning for the shape and the geography and the location, what uses, if any, would be allowed in those locations, and what ecosystems are protected, what habitat replicates are involved, what science and fish and game guidelines are addressed. And those maps, along with the rationales and an overarching narrative for each working group's map, there are 3 altogether, have been advanced to the Fish and Game and to the MLPA staff for review and evaluation. We would be expecting those back in a couple of weeks. And then in October, the regional stakeholder group will be meeting jointly with the Blue Ribbon Task Force. You may remember that the Blue Ribbon Task Force are the folks who evaluate our maps and ultimately make a recommendation of a preferred alternative map or array, which could be a single map or it could be, as they like to refer to, a sausage-making map, where they take various arrays from different maps and put them together, to the California Fish and Game Commission, which will make its final decision on the array it wants to see, and after environmental review, legal review, regulatory oversight, that will be implemented. It's about a 2-year process. So I will certainly report back to you after the joint meeting in October. That's the week of October 19th. And we'll keep you posted on this very, very important process as we move forward, because, of course, it both has tremendous implications for the conservation of our very, very important and sometimes fragile marine ecosystems along the coast. It has a lot of important implications socioeconomically for our ports and harbors, our extractive interests like recreational and commercial fishermen, and of course the longstanding culture of our coastal communities. So I will certainly keep you in the loop on that. And finally, yes, it's just around the corner again. The Harbor and Seafood Festival will be Saturday, October 10th. The years must be flying by because it seems like we just finished one. But it's going to have all the trappings that we come to love and expect, anchored, if you will, by the legendary albacore barbecue. We will be doing 600 pounds of albacore loins, plus lobsters, crabs, oysters right off the boat, shrimp right off the boats, and fish tacos, Brophy's clam chowder, lobster bisques from the waterfront grill, seafood cooking demonstrations, 16 different agencies on the city pier, informing and interacting with the public, 40-plus arts and crafts vendors, boat tours, marine tall ship tours, Coast Guard vessel tours, and what have you. And also, we've really upgraded the music this year. We've got Spencer the Gardener is going to be playing. And again, not to overuse the word, they will be anchoring the music side of things. And they're joined by a renowned San Diego group as well, who I actually heard at Scott Reedman's wedding and can attest to their excellence. That would be Fish and the Seaweeds, and they are a fantastic group. And so the music is really going to be great this year, and we invite people to come in and enjoy that as well. And finally, it's important for me to note that this year we have a really special raffle going on. A smart car, and you may have seen it. It's sitting right now on the the Maritime Museum's patio. Will be raffled off. The benefits will go to the Maritime Museum. The smart car is being provided by the Santa Barbara Auto Group. It's a 3-cylinder, 70 horsepower, 40 miles to the gallon vehicle. It comes highly recommended. Raffle tickets are $20 a piece, or 3 for $50 for this car that retails for over $13,000. And here are a few ways that you can buy a ticket, because the ticket sales will end on October 10th, the day of the Harbor Festival, and will, in fact, the winner will be drawn at 5 o'clock on the center music stage at the Harbor Festival. Here are some ways you can buy a raffle ticket. First, you can call the Maritime Museum store at 805-962-8404 extension 104. I apologize for going through these, but I want to get the word out. And the car's only been there a little while, and the festival's coming up. That's 805-9622-8404, extension 104. You can go to the Maritime Museum's website at sbmm.org. That's sbmm.org, where you can download a PDF version of the entry form and sign it and fax it into 805-962-7634. That fax number from the Maritime Museum, again, is 805-962-7634. And finally, you can go to our website. It's not the city website, but there is a dedicated website for the Harbor Festival. It's harborfestival.org, and there's a hyperlink there to the smart car raffle, and you can download a form there. So again, if you want to fax a raffle entry in, it has to be done by noon on the day of the drawing, October 10th. If you're going to hand deliver your entry, you can certainly do it at the festival, at the Maritime Museum, on the day of the festival on October 10th. So with that, Mr. Chair, I would conclude my report, and I would certainly be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mick. Commissioner Owen.
Great report, Mick. Thank you. Recall several years ago there was a tsunami alert and a bunch of controversy about people not being informed about it. So I think the reverse 911 test is a good idea from that level alone. They're very rare, but when they do happen, they're quite devastating. And we do have a lot of people down at our harbor. So I guess I'm left wondering who gets called. Is that just landlines these days? I mean, isn't that normally how reverse 911 works? So that left me wondering, well, gee, how many people at the waterfront have landlines on their boats anymore? And I know the survey will give people a chance to register phone numbers, so I guess maybe that's how you take it a little bit further, and it seems like that would be really important to make sure that people know that they can register their cell phone numbers too.
Commissioner Owen, thank you. That's absolutely true and is one of the intents of this. My understanding is it will go to cell phones, it will go to landlines, it will go to any numbers that are listed by slip permittees on their slip permit. They have, and I believe it may even go to their emergency contacts. But my understanding is it will go to their cell phones. And if it doesn't, I'm sure we'll hear about it, and I'll work with the sheriffs to see what we can do to tune that up. I'm pretty sure it will.
All right. Any further questions for Mr. Cronlund? Thank you, Mick. New business.
Proposed lease agreement with Union Marine Station, Inc. Recommendation that Harbor Commission review and recommend to the City Council approval of a 5-year lease agreement with Union Marine Station, Inc. for a 218-square-foot office located on the second floor at 125 Harbor Way, Suite 12, at a rate of $492 per month, subject to annual cost of living increases.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, the harbor fuel dock was leased by Unocal since the 1950s. A local fuel distributor, McCormick's Corporation, acquired the lease through an RFP process, request for proposals process, in December of 2003. This is not that lease. McCormick's holds the lease for the fuel facility itself. Bob Meyer has managed the fuel dock since 1985 under management contracts with Unocal, subsequently Tosco when they bought out Unocal, and he continues to manage the fuel dock for McCormick's Corporation. So we're really talking about two leases here. The fuel dock facility is McCormick's, and then Bob Meyer rents an office in the Marine Center building. He's leased the office on the second floor of the Marine Center building, suite number 12, since 1992. He's actually occupied the office longer than that when he partnered up with Ken Elms. He was in that office much earlier than 92, but he's leased directly with the city since 92. The lease will expire in October, and Mr. Meyer would like to enter into a new lease with the city. He's happy with his office. The basic lease terms are what Mary mentioned, a term of 5 years at an initial rate of $492 per month, annual cost of living adjustment based on change of the CPI, and a 15-cent per square foot utility charge, which is standard in that building. It has 1 meter for all the offices in the building, and so we charge all the office tenants just a flat 15 cents a square foot charge. Mr. Meyer is considered a tenant in good standing by the department. He's always prompt with his rent payments and doesn't have any issues or notices of default on file. And the proposed lease agreement will allow them to continue the on-site management of the harbor fuel dock, a very important facility. That concludes that report, unless there are any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Reedman. Any questions for Scott on this proposed lease agreement? Commissioner Owen.
Oh, I was just going to move approval of the recommendation.
Okay, I was getting ready to call for a motion, so there's the motion. Is there a second? Okay, there's a second. Any further discussion before the vote? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. So the fiscal year budgetary review.
Recommendation that Harbor Commission review and consider a status report on the Waterfront Department fiscal year 2009 review and expenses, revenue and expenses, excuse.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, each September we like to report out on the prior year's fiscal year budget performance. Tonight we'll be talking about the fiscal year 2009 budget performance, that is the period from July 1st, 2008 to June 30th, 2009. And at the risk of being repetitive, I know the commissioners are all well aware of this, but for the benefit of the public watching at home, I always like to jump into these budget presentations by reiterating that the Waterfront Department is an enterprise fund. As separate from the general fund, receives no tax revenue, such as transient occupancy tax or hotel bed tax, utility users tax, vehicle license fees, property taxes, sales taxes, and so on, which actually this year is a very good thing. The Waterfront Department's entirely dependent on user fees. Of course, these revenue sources include rental income, including all the businesses on Stearns Wharf, parking fees from the 8 or so lots that we manage from the Cabrillos to Ledbetter, and then marina fees, including slip fees. A summary of the revenue by program. These are, again, the four major sources of revenue. Property management was off by the end of the year by $68,000 or so, only a 1.6% variance, which is not bad considering we're dependent largely on percentage rent leases. The financial management revenue was over by about $65,000, and this is simply interest income on our operating reserves. Parking services was under by about $86,000 or 4.6%. We'll talk a little bit more about why that is in a moment. And marina management was the biggest hit. We're about $318,000 off at the end of the year, about 6.3%. Bottom line is we have a revenue shortfall at the year end of about $406,500 less than we had budgeted for. And as the Commission will recall, when we did our mid-year review in January, we had forecast a $500,000 revenue shortfall. So we were quite close to that forecast. Fortunately, we were just a bit on the good side of that. Okay, so in your packet, there's a line item spreadsheet on all of the Waterfront Department's revenue. We're not going to go through that, but you certainly have it if you need it. I'll just hit a couple of the highlights as we go through, and if there are any further questions, I'd be happy to answer. Property management issues was really Stearns Wharf commercial and retail and food service leases came in about $100,000 under budget by year end. By comparison, that's about 3.7% less than these businesses received in fiscal year 2008 compared to fiscal year 2009. So I found it interesting, since the wharf is so visitor dependent, that the transient occupancy tax for the same period, July 1st through June 30th, 2008 compared with 2009, the TOT or bed tax was down by $900,000 or 6.9%. So the wharf is tracking a little bit better than the hotel tax, at least. So I don't know what that tells us. Maybe that we do still get some locals out there, or maybe one-day visitors are heading out to the wharf as well. Parking services, again, Stearns Wharf parking was off by $47,000. Had our parking staff do a car count, a ticket count of how many parking tickets were issued out on the wharf, and those were off by about 28,000. So clearly we had about 28,000 less vehicles enter Stearns Wharf this fiscal year versus last fiscal year. So I believe that explains that. The other trend that we've noticed is a decline in annual parking permit sales. Over the last several years, in your packet, it discusses that we've had a 46% fee increase, incremental fee increase for fiscal years 2004, 2005, 2006, and 2007. And during that time period, we've seen a 27% attrition in our revenue from annual parking passes. And then another big factor is Santa Barbara City College, until last year, for 3 or 4 years there, they were buying 200 to 300 parking permits from us at full price and distributing them to their students at a discount. And that was $18,000 to $23,000 of revenue in one shot for us. So that's another part of this issue here that we're seeing. Of course, the big news that we're all familiar with, and discussed it many times, was the slip transfer fee issue. We budgeted $688,000 in this line item. We achieved about $348,000, or 50% less than we initially budgeted for. Obviously, we've come to realize that this is a very volatile budget item, very much subject to economic fluctuations, fairly easily explainable in that way. As indicated in your report, though, this has rebounded somewhat at the beginning of this fiscal year. We've seen 18 slip transfers between July 1st and today, with a value of $148,000 of revenue to the department. So we would certainly like to see that trend continue. It would put us hopefully right back on track. And then miscellaneous revenue in the marina management program was down by $31,400. So the total revenue through June 30th, 2009 was $11,027,000. The budget target was $11,443,000. Again, we were down by $406,000 at the end of the year, about 3.6% of our budget. And comparing that to what we realized in revenue for fiscal year 2008, it's about $604,000 less than 2008, or about 5%. Moving on to the expense side of the equation. The department's budget was $12,168,000. The expenses came in about $701,000 under budget, so that's good news, about 5.8% under budget on our expense side. I'll explain that again in a little bit of detail as well. Salaries and benefits, out of a $5.5 million line item, came in about $101,000 below budget. Just 1.8%, just a slightly under budget, but that's fairly common for our salaries and benefits line item. As we get turnover, there's a gap between when you fill the position and the new position comes in at a lower rate. So it's fairly common for us to come in a little bit under in salaries and benefits. Supplies and services, we had a little more significant savings. Came in about $284,000, $285,000 under budget. And we'll talk a little bit about why that was. But this is a summary of the expenses at the end of the fiscal year 2009. Again, the first two lines I discussed about salaries and benefits and supplies and services. Included in this figure was a $865,000 transfer to our capital fund from our operating fund to fund waterfront department capital projects, such as the slurry sealing and so forth that Carl mentioned earlier. We had a very mild winter. We'll touch on that some more. It had a profound effect on our operating budget this year. We did not have to use any of our appropriated reserves this time around. We didn't have any big unexpected expenses, so we didn't have to dip into that at all. Other revenue came in about $104,000 less, and the debt service, of course, is what it is. So bottom line, as I said, supplies and services were about $701,000 under budget. So some of the items that brought us in under budget were the financial management system replacement project, which we had initially budgeted $61,000 and change, and that's a citywide effort to upgrade the financial management system. That project has been delayed, obviously, citywide due to budgetary issues, and is expected to be reinstated next year or the following year, depending on how the economy shapes up. It's an old system and very much needs replacement. Parking equipment came in $66,000 under budget. We just It was not needed. Interestingly, electrical usage in the marinas and around the harbor was $36,700 under budget. We believe this may be attributable again to a very warm winter. If you remember back to last January, we had a stretch of 6 or 8 weeks of absolutely beautiful weather and sunshine. So people didn't need to run their heaters necessarily on their boats. Those tend to draw quite a bit of power. Again, weather-related equipment, wharf maintenance, $58,000. We had to do less maintenance on the wharf due to virtually no swell events, no major swell events, and that affected the maintenance needs and also the waste disposal. When we pull out those creosote piles and that treated lumber, it cost us quite a bit to dispose of that material, and so we experienced a savings on both sides, on the maintenance side and the disposal side. Jumping back up to equipment rental, we rent quite a bit of the heavy equipment that the maintenance folks use, man lifts and forklifts and so forth, and we came in $34,000 under budget in equipment rental, and then, as I mentioned, appropriated reserves came in at the full $150,000 that we didn't have to dip into. So this is what's in your packet as well. Expense by program. I won't go through every one of these, but for instance, the administration program came in $237,000 under budget, and that's where you see the $150,000 from the appropriated reserves and the $61,000 from the FMS replacement. That pretty much gets you pretty close to the $237,000 savings. Another example, again, parking services. The bulk of that was the equipment. Harbor maintenance and wharf maintenance, again, great savings there, mostly on account of a very mild winter, little wave action, less need for repair all the way around. So that really is my summary of the fiscal year 2009 budget performance. The next steps will be embarking upon the capital improvement plan on October 5th. We'll expect to bring that to you at the November 19th meeting. Next calendar year, 2010, we'll, as usual, we'll plan on bringing you a mid-year budget review at the meeting on January 21st. February 18th meeting, we'll probably embark upon a budget overview of issues, in our typical fashion, issues that we'll be facing and how we might plan on dealing with them. And then a budget recommendation in March or April, budget recommendation to the City Council. And that concludes my report, unless there are any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Reedman. Are there any questions for Scott on the budget? Commissioner Spicer.
I just returned from a trade conference in the publishing and data industry, and they would kill to have numbers like this. So it's a compliment to you to keep the revenues numbers together like that.
Commissioner Owen.
What's the parking equipment that we didn't replace and save so much money on?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Owen, I believe we had some extra money in the budget left over from the honor fee system that was installed in the Palm Park parking lot. And we have also been receiving hand-me-down equipment from Downtown Parking, who's upgraded all of their systems in their multiple lots to a newer, I'm a little jealous, but nicer, newer system. But we're getting all their old parking equipment, so that factors into that as well.
Glad to hear it. I've always, from the very beginning, as Mr. Bradley well knows, supported the honor fee system. Those boxes are just beautiful and cost as much as houses do in some place in this country. They're really expensive. So as few of those that we can buy, I think the better the budget picture will look.
All right. Any Commissioner Kramer?
One sort of side question, is there any comparison, do you have any comparison with other marinas in the area as to how much they've been down over this past year? So I think this is really actually pretty impressive, and I agree with Mr. Spicer. It's encouraging.
Chairman Kelly, Commissioner Kramer, that would be an interesting study to do, and I might be a little ambitious, but I could bring some of that forward as we move further into the year. I don't have any hard and fast data. We do a January survey of marina fees and so forth, so perhaps in January we can look at some of their budgets as well and add that to that survey that we do. I do know that we recently received the newsletter from the Santa Cruz Harbor, and they're experiencing vacancies in their slips, which we are not. We're 100% occupied in our property management department, and we're virtually 100% occupied in our slips, of course. So we're seeing other harbors with a vacancy issue. I believe Channel Islands has some vacancies. Ventura may as well. But that would be interesting. I don't have that information at this time.
Thanks. Commissioner Owen.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the slip transfer fee and how we're kind of at the mercy of the market when it comes to that. If we didn't try to make our revenue through a slip transfer fee, then we'd be doing it with much higher slip fees, and we might have a vacancy rate. So maybe it's not apples and oranges, or apples and apples. Interesting to contemplate.
Any additional comments? One or two. I may have been thinking about something else, and I apologize, Scott, if you covered it, just tell me, and I'll watch the tape and catch it. The miscellaneous revenue, where there was the big $31,000 discrepancy between what we budgeted, did you cover that?
Chairman Kelly, I should have known. I couldn't just skim over that with you watching me like that. Miscellaneous revenue in the Marina Management Program is primarily revenue from the Catamaran beach permits, which we used to sell out of right at the first day. And the last 2 or 3 years now, we have not sold out of those permits. That's a part of it. It's also the outrigger permits and the small boat permits for West Beach, which we did sell out of both of those last fiscal year. That doesn't account for the whole $31,000. I was scrambling today to find out what the rest of that $31,000 was. I believe that is an anomaly in the budget, that we budgeted too high in that line item because we don't have a lot of other revenue streams going into that. What has happened in the past is that we get grants from the state Department of Boating and Waterways for abandoned vessel disposal from the vessels that wash up on West Beach, and when those grant checks come through, they somehow seem to get applied into that line item. So I think what we've done is when we're doing our budgeting, we look back and we might see artificially high revenue in that line item. And what we've been doing is we've been very diligent about making sure those grant monies get applied to a grant line item and they don't just disappear into property management miscellaneous revenue, which has happened, and into marina management miscellaneous revenue. So that's what I believe is happening, is we're seeing grant monies flowing in there and throwing off our budget.
Okay, thank you. I have one other question. That's on the La Playa East and West. We budgeted, it's not big monies, but we budgeted 76 and 56 and brought in 13.3 and 11.3, and I'm wondering if there's a reason why we missed it so, because it's the only part where we really missed it wildly in the parking services.
Chairman Kelly, fortunately, it's more money
on the plus
than
side too.
we budgeted for. So, one thing that comes immediately to mind, and we haven't reported this out to the commission yet. We've been collaborating during the summer months. City College approached us with their new fee program. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but they installed some boxes in the La Playas, and that you put in. People used to park there for free. And now it's not for free, and City College enforces it and patrols it. So you put your money in the box, pull out your parking ticket, and you park there. As you know, we have a joint powers agreement where we share the lots with City College, and they're basically our lots in the summer, and their lots during the school year. In the summer, when they're technically our lots, they continue to charge people that park in there, and they bring the money over to us on a weekly basis from those machines.
We should encourage lots of this.
Yeah. So that's at least some of what we're seeing there. We do get some revenue out of there doing big events, 4th of July, Harbor Festival, and also not Wet Wednesdays, but the Night Moves events.
Okay.
So instead of just going across the street at Night Moves and parking for free at La Playa, instead of paying to go in Ledbetter, now they got to pay either way they go. So we're seeing it in Ledbetter or we're seeing it in La Playa. So I believe that's what you're seeing there.
Okay. And then I think it's Commissioner Kramer and I are on the budget committee, and I'm wondering when the first committee meeting will come regarding the next year's budget. Since this is sort of related, I would ask that question. Do you have any idea?
Mr. Chair, I might answer that because I don't think Scott and I have really talked about it, and I go to the city budget policy meetings, which are a collaboration of all departments looking at the challenges within the city as a whole. Until we get budget direction or instructions about when our submittals are due and when we get the target information from finance, we really don't have much to meet about. So last year, if I remember, we may have had a meeting in December, somewhere along those lines, maybe early January. That was, I think, our first meeting of the Budget Committee, somewhere along there. And when I would anticipate it to be similar, I believe this year's budget process for the city as a whole, including the general fund, will be a bit easier than it has been in comparison to last year when they were looking at a $9-10 million shortfall. I think for the fiscal year 2010, they're looking at about $3 to $4 million shortfall, but fiscal year 2011, they're looking at almost $6 million. So the following year will be, again, another budget challenge. So once we get that direction and some of the target and financial information where we can begin to look at what we need to present to you, we will schedule that meeting. The one thing I will point out, and Scott can help me if I don't have this accurately portrayed, as you indicated, we did quite well in comparison to fiscal year 2008 and the previous year in our budget projections. However, we are seeing for just the first 6 months of the calendar year, from June through July, August, if I remember right, more of a downturn than we had anticipated. Our businesses are off more than they were in the first 6 months of this year than they were last year. The good news is marina revenues are actually up, so that may help offset to a degree some of the shortfalls that we're seeing in the first 6 months of this this calendar year as opposed to our fiscal year. So is that a trend? I don't know. We won't know that probably for another 3 or 4 months, which will get us right around to the end of this year and when we'll be needing to put the budget together. So we will keep track of that. I think Scott and his staff do an excellent job of doing this on a monthly basis. We don't have any surprises. By the time we get to you with some preliminary budget projections for the upcoming year, I think we will know the trends and whether they're flatlining or continuing to slide or hopefully improving slightly.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley. You covered the point that I was going to go to, which was what is the fiscal year 10 budget projections? I mean, how are we doing compared to 9? And you covered that. I would ask if a note could be made, because there was a very interesting correlation in our parking permits between the amount that we've increased our parking permit fees and the decline that we've seen in our revenue. And so if Mary could make a note so that does come up in our budget considerations, we might actually want to consider going back and see if we can get the revenue back.
Yeah, as you know, we were quite concerned about the literally 2 years in a row running where we increased the parking annual permit fee. I think overall the trend is holding steady. I mean, we're selling a few less permits, but we're generating as much income as we had projected or hoped. And again, I think the major downturn in what you saw this year was just the 200 or 300 permits that City College didn't buy for their students and their faculty. Actually, more for their faculty than the students. But so who knows? That could turn around. That would put us right back over the top again.
Okay. All right. Are there any further questions or comments from Mr. Bradley or Mr. Reedman? Excellent. Are there any staff commission communications?
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, I do not have any this month.
Commissioner Kramer.
I'd like to make a notice that you perhaps saw the letter or the news story in the Santa Barbara News Press. There have been some horrendous injuries to seabirds recently, particularly the Harbor Patrol picked up a pelican that had its upper beak off, and this is very unlikely to be a natural occurrence, and a reward has been offered for any information that would lead to the arrest and conviction of people doing this. So I would encourage anyone who's listening who knows anything about this they could contact me, and I'm in the phone book, or perhaps the Harbor Patrol. Thank you.
All right. If there are no communications, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. I think we're going home.